Hello, welcome to MJR RPG, a podcast for tabletop role-playing game reviews, replays, etc., and so forth. This is part 3 of the replay for my Call of Cthulhu scenario, Branches of Bone. If you haven't listened to part 1, you should probably go do that, or you can listen to the overview of the scenario, or you can just purchase it on DriveThruRPG. This replay is full of spoilers. If you're ever thinking of playing the scenario, I would go away now. Otherwise, onto Branches of Bone, part 3. In a daze, Harald stumbled out of the store's room, nearly tripping over something that snagged his foot. A branch, gnarled and pitted, growing up between cracked stones. Harald didn't remember it being there before. With a rising terror, he looked across the floor. Twigs, branches, roots, bark, all splitting the stonework floors and walls, reaching out as if to grasp for him. For Revna and Sven, the center of the hall. Harald knew then that it stirred awake. Whatever it was, wherever it was, its long slumber ended. If he had spoke with Sven, if he had heard the beating below in the crypt behind the living wood, maybe they would realize where it was, what they were inside of. And maybe if he spoke with Revna, she'd share her theory on the standing stones, their symbols, and the stained glass. And if Harald knew all of Njal's visions, maybe they would all decide on a path to repeat what those people long in the past had done. Instead, Harald grabbed a torch from a nearby sconce. Notably, the branches did not grow near the fire, and marched to the front door, stomping on branches and roots. Something blocked his way, though, something rising from the ground. Long, spindly branches like spider legs jutting out of its wretched form, bark crusting its face and arms. What remained of the monk, cut down at the door, smiled. Then, with a howl like wind through a forest, skittered towards Harald. With a half-swallowed scream, he managed to duck the monk thing's grasping appendages and thrust his torch into its face. It screeched and scrambled back, but the flames licked its head, quickly engulfing its body. Hearing the commotion, Njal came sprinting and roaring out of the store's room, cleaving his axe through the thing, sending burning branches and splinters spinning across the hall. It crumbled in a ball of embers and smoke. A cry from Sven drew their attention, as the fallen priest also rose on a web of branches and roots. The monk, pinned with a spear against the crypt door, fumbled at the shaft with hands of bark and twigs. The 3 breathing monks screamed and huddled in a corner, stomping and kicking at grasping roots snagging their robes. Harald and Njal rushed forward as Sven and Revna fought the priest thing with staff and sword. Their unskilled slashes and swings bounced off the priest's thick bark hide. It enveloped Sven, pulling him into an embrace, spires of wood jabbing into his skin, spreading their corruption and madness. Njal's axe cut the steersman free, and as the priest stumbled back from the fierce attack, Harald shoved the torch into its chest, lighting robes and wood alike. The thing screamed and died in a blaze. A spear thrust into Njal's shoulder. His armor caught most of it, and its return swing lopped off the tree monk's head. Breathing deep once all their foes lay dead, again, they started coughing. The fire spread from the burning corpses, flames rolling along the floor and up the walls, catching branches and roots, cringing away from the licking blaze. Billowing smoke rapidly filled the hall, and already the ceiling had vanished into darkness. Eyes and throats stinging, they tried to duck down and keep the smoke out of their lungs. Njal sputtered and took a deep breath, and by the grace of his gods, his great wiry beard filtered out most of the suit. Revna's fortitude and luck proved not as fortunate, and soon she hacked and spat, choking on the smoke. Seeing her falling to her knees, Sven grabbed and pulled her into the crypt's staircase. The smoke might be thinner further down. The others followed, and once into the spiral stairway, mercifully largely free of smoke, they shoved the door closed. Wispy tendrils puffed through the edges, but the air in the stone passageway was cool and breathable. With lungs and throat raw but functioning, Revna stood on her own shaky power, and the group started down the stairs, wanting to get as far from the fire as possible. Maybe it would burn its way out of the monastery before it consumed the air in the crypt, or maybe they could find another way out, or dig their way out if it came down to it. A 5-voiced cry rang out from the crypt. Only one voice spoke in their own tongue, and in a voice they recognized. Askar, roaring in outrage, that they'd ruined everything, that he'd finally awoken, that he still had to find Mother again. The ranting chorus and the clatter of armor and weapons grew louder, and the Vikings readied their weapons. Around the curve of the spiral staircase, Asker and his host rounded in all their horrific glory. Branches splitting crusted flesh groped forward, scratching against the stone walls. Root-like fingers clutched at swords and axes, and their mail and leather armor wove through with the bark and bone-like spurs. Mouths gaping painfully wide, screeching and cursing, the thing scrambled up the stairs, then paused. Asker's blank eyes focused on Harald. In a voice like his father's, but still all wrong, the thing offered Harald an escape. If the others died, left behind to feed it, Harald could leave as a priest, spreading the word of the great return. In reply, a throwing axe and a javelin sped forward, driving Asker to his knees. Harald's sword parted whatever was left of his father's head from its body, spraying yellow goop across the hall. The 3 tree Vikings screeched as if in pain and rushed forward. Blades screamed and slashed against shield and armor, blood and branches spitting on the stone. Despite their best efforts, Njal, Harald, and Sven were pushed back step by step, until Revna at the rear found herself pressed up against the door, once again breathing burning hot smoke. Unable to move, she squeezed her eyes shut against the suit and prayed to all her gods. They answered with a deep rumble. And then the world started crashing down around them. Stones crumbled from the ceiling, smashing into helmets and shields, crushing the tree creatures. A chunk of the wall slipped free and bashed into Revna, sending her spinning and bleeding. With a helping hand, she found her feet, only barely keeping conscious. The church was falling apart. With nowhere else to go, they decided to make a run for it, hoping the entranceway would be clear. They sprinted across the hall, narrowly dodging falling pieces of the dying monastery. The double doors at the entrance smoldered and buckled, and with a roar, Njal smashed through them. The 4 stumbled out into the courtyard, coughing and hacking, wiping blood and ash from their leaking eyes, then turned to watch the monastery finally perish. But it didn't. The stone fell away, revealing a mass of twisted, bulging, woody flesh beneath it. A massive trunk, roots as thick as mules slithering out, spindly branches unfurling, and their tips formed the mocking figures of hanged men. Black pits where the church's entrance and windows had been gaped like a baleful face. The thing blazed, the fire rising into the sky, chasing away the night, and it screamed. But it did not die. Not yet. Instead, its mop of roots dragged its mass forward, starting slow, ripping free of the earth and remaining stone foundations. Then gathering speed, the great beast towering over the 4 came closer and closer, branches reaching down, grasping. They ran. The copse of ash trees they'd passed through when they first landed on the island now stood as a thick forest. Njal reached the trees first, without giving thought to where they had come from, began wildly swinging his axe to cut a path. Knowing his companions lacked the strength needed to push through the brush quickly, he widened his attack, scything clear a corridor for the others. Harald and Sven sprinted through the cleared path, past the winded Njal, and straight towards the bluff. Revna came up last, winded, weakened from the fire, and on her heel, the great tree slithered after, smashing through the forest. Njal leaned huffing over his axe, watching Revna plod across the clearing to the bluff, then turned to the forest, hearing their pursuer closing in. It would catch her, and at its pace, Harald and Sven soon enough as well. Smiling and standing straight, Njal tore off his armor, gnashing his teeth and howling, cutting his flesh and drinking his own blood. He howled like a beast. As the pillar of fire and flailing limbs burst from the forest, Njal laughed and threw himself forward. His battle axe swung in a blur, lopping off branches and splitting bark. As tendrils shot forward, he spun and danced, joyously carving more wood and giggling like a child at the beast's screams. This was what he had come here for. This is what he lived for. And this is what he would graciously die for. Battle. Even with his berserker fury, Njal had only 2 arms, while his opponent had uncountable limbs. They wrapped about his waist, jabbed through his biceps, lifted him into the air. It pulled him into a bone-breaking embrace, dragging him into the mass of bark and thick, yellow-stained flesh. He felt it tearing away his skin, and its madness pierced his mind. And still he laughed, and cut as best he could with his axe. And when he could no longer swing, he bit and tore with his hands. Sven and Harald carefully picked their way down the slick bluff to the dock, while Sven continued down to the dock, then jumped into and started readying the boat. Harald stopped and looked back. Revna came careening over the edge of the bluff. With no hesitancy, she ran down the steep cliff trail. Harald watched with eyes wide, ready to see her trip and dash herself on the rocks. But like a billy goat, she hopped from rock to rock, coming to the base of the bluff on her feet. And over the crest, the tree, engulfed in a great fireball, came tumbling over, spilling down the bluff. Harald grabbed Revna and bodily carried her to the boat, screaming all the way. The fairing sped out of the cove, skipping over the waves under the power of Harald and Sven, rowing like mad, Revna calling out directions only half heard over the surf and the roar of the beast, smashing, steaming into the water. They slipped between the rocks, the beast crashing through them recklessly behind them. The ocean refused to cooperate, and a rogue wave smashed the fairing into a craggy rock, spilling Revna over the edge. Harald and Sven held strong though, and the fairing sped out into open seas. Choking on salt water and hearing the waves from the tree boiling on her tail, Revna used what little strength and luck granted by her gods she still had left to swim. Harald and Sven watched in wonder as Revna raced out from the rocks, and behind her the pillar of flames and screams waded out. And just before it grabbed her, it tumbled forward, slipping over a drop-off beneath the waves. And in the moment before the creature disappeared into the ocean, they swore they saw a face among the burning wood, a face smiling and biting and raging. Njal remembered falling from the heavens. He remembered his mother summoned to this world and being forcefully split from her and tumbling away onto this horrible earth. As he screamed and slammed into the ground that would hold him captive for eons, his mighty mother disappeared back into the cosmos. And now, after such a long slumber, he'd been so close to starting his search again, only to burn and drown. Njal could feel the tears inside him, bit and ripped by his own teeth. He had died, or something like him had died. But now that he was something greater, or part of something greater, he died again, deep beneath the waves, falling into a cold, crushing blackness. Once a shivering Revna had been pulled up into the fairing, they set off for home, their bodies and minds scarred, flesh twisted with bark, and dreams plagued with ancient memories. But, back among their people, they would return with stories of slaying a beast of legends, and blessed with the wood of Yggdrasil in their very flesh. They made their plans, and returned to their land as a great captain, a wise volar, and a fabled chieftain. And beneath the seas, they hoped the tree drowned, but they would have nightmares of something crossing the endless plains and canyons of the ocean floor, dragging itself ever closer to those who had cast it down, those who had abandoned it. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this replay, please consider purchasing Branches of Bone from DriveThruRPG. See the show notes for a discount. And thanks to Fuimadane for the generous use of his powerful music. Find links to his YouTube and Bandcamp in the show notes. And as always, thanks to CryoChamber for the use of their album Cthulhu. Links again in the show notes. Until next time, have a good one.